Don't underestimate
the power
of a single
conversation.
It could change your whole life.
INCRadio Chatline.
conversations that matter.
All right, it is chat time on Chatline. Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about a very important topic, the influence of pop culture on the youth. And we're going to get a broad panel of perspectives from a panel of guests that stretches far and wide, not really just Texas and the Midwest. But I'm Nathan Russell, your host for today here in Fort Worth, Texas. I'll go to my other panelists here in Texas. Go and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Arnie, also here in Fort Worth, and I like animated better.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that beforehand. Do you prefer live action or animated? I'm animated also.
I like animated only because some of the real life people, they don't fit the character, so animated is best.
Is it always a letdown?
I would say animation does give you it does give you more freedom in terms of like making especially if you're adapting it from like a novel or something. It gives you more freedom.
Who might you be?
Yes, hello everyone. Elson Java Cruz. You can call me EJ, live here from Rockford, Illinois. And yes, I do prefer animated as well. Because right. I think, yeah, if you're adapting from a book, it does give you like a lot more freedom in terms of like how you want the character to look. Like with live action, you can only make an actor look as much as the character described in the book.
Lastly but not leastly, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Leastly, I like that. Hi everyone, Tony Valenzuela. And I don't know between the two. I think it depends. I think the fun stuff, I don't mind the animated. More serious stuff, maybe live action. I don't know. This depends.
That is such a weak answer.
I know.
Come on, really stand.
I can't.
But you know, Ren's in our chat, he chose animated, so he likes animated better. Right, imagination is the limit.
Animated has won the day.
And like I said, because like for me with some of the cartoons, the animated version, of course, you know, the characters are pretty cool. And then when they pick the real actors to play them in the real life, I'm like, it doesn't match. Yeah. So I think that's why I like the animated
a bit.
Yeah, especially like when they have like really puffy yellow hair. I mean, you love like the blonde hair, yellow haired guys. Blonde. I'm getting them mixed up. Blue-eyed, blonde-haired animated characters that are all spiked up. You know who I'm talking about. That did not translate well into real life. But
no. Okay, but since we're talking about cartoons and all that stuff, I have to admit that one thing. So even though I am into like the whole blue-eyed blonde hair, it's just funny because when I watch the different princess movies, I'm like, oh, actually, like Prince Eric is cuter than Prince Charming, and he's not blue-eyed blonde hair. Just thought I'd throw it out there.
So you can already see the influence of pop culture on when we were youth, however long ago that was. But let's go ahead and jump into it. So they noticed that like for shows for little children, it can be very, very highly stimulating. Lots of lights and color, and things are never staying still for too long. EJ, we had discussed earlier this week. What was a prime example that you'd mention?
Yeah, there's a lot of like I think especially now there's a lot of like those like kind of like made for kids. Like it's what's the word? Reminiscent. It's reminiscent. It kind of reminds you of like some like cartoons you'll see on TV, but I think the big difference is that one, it's mostly songs, and two, there's like what you said, there's a lot of colors, there's a lot of movement, you know, like just I feel like for kids maybe a little bit of like a sensory over, like I got sensory overload just by like looking at it for a couple of seconds because I'm like, wait, what's going on? You know, like there's this music and then there's a lot of visuals. like on screen. Like even
I don't know how popular this is. How popular is our shows?
Oh, very, very. I would say you can mention it too. Like a lot of the shows, a lot of the shows you can mention to practically anyone, and they'll know just by like pop culture osmosis.
Social media helps too. I think with that,
Yeah.
you just get exposed to more of the shows. Like there's a lot of shows that I didn't know about until I heard it from
Mhm.
social, like random clips from social media, and the
Mhm.
ones that I typically see, aside from just like the sensory overload, like the music and whatever, like movement, even how colorful it is. Like sometimes they're just very saturated. You're just like, whoa! I feel like I'm taking in a lot at the same time. Whereas in my
Yeah.
childhood, things were more kind of, I don't want to say it was like dull, but it wasn't like that. It was
Pastel,
more like story, yeah,
Softer,
pastel,
softer color.
storybook like, you know, very different.
Technicolor.
But yeah, softer
And
colors, right?
they did talk about that with these higher stimulated cartoons, that when their children were watching it, they were like very hyper, and then
Mm,
they let them watch the different cartoons like that we watched when we were younger. Like you said, it's not as bright, it's more muted colors, and it was more mellow, that the child was actually mellow when they were watching it. And so I think it really does have an effect on children somehow.
You know, but for like a child's development, like stimulating their mind isn't necessarily a bad thing on its own,
right.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You shouldn't go and paint your child's bedroom black and white just out of a fear that there might be too much stimulation. Do we know if there's a fine line for that though? I mean, like
Mm.
I know when my son was growing up, my wife found a show that taught like the alphabet, how to read, and he knew how to read when he was like 2 years old. It blows my mind because I couldn't read till I was like halfway through five, but he was reading when he was two. And so I guess his mind was stimulated in that way. And of course, like nowadays, you can just look it up on YouTube. You got it all on tap. You can get it whenever you want. Whereas back then, me and Arnie's generation, we had to wait around until it came around on TV, maybe just a few hours a day, and that was it. Surrounded
Mm.
by like really dry news, if you know what I mean.
I would say like even for us, like like especially even if you're like young, because the way that they showed it before is like it's only on the weekends, because that's kind of like the most of the time that's like the only time the kids will be either like in the afternoon when kids are like kind of like they're kind of coming home from school, or like if you want to watch it in the morning, then it's gotta be in like a weekend. That you can't just really open up like your TV and just like, oh, I want to watch this right now. you know.
And you know how you're talking about how does it affect children? Ren's actually put something really good in the chat where he says, pop culture affects the way I talk. As a non-native speaker of English, of what I say, 50% of what I say is from what I listen. And so,
Mhm.
see, it's not just the kids, it's also the adults. Pop culture could affect the way they speak because, if that's what they're hearing all the time, then that's what they think probably the norm is.
When you know what, in the 2000s, before meme culture was a thing, like
Mhm.
everyone kind of watched the same comedic movies. And if you remember, like I don't know if Arnie, you if ever did this, but we would just like quote lines from movies every time like you come across your friends, and that was just like a thing to do, which is just quote movie lines. And like we did that like all the time. It felt like we had entire conversations where we were just like quoting each other. And it's like we were talking like the characters from the movies we watched, when
Mhm.
we were in our late teens and early 20s. Can anyone else here relate to that?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I would say so. Just because you just remember things. Like things were just like genuinely funny, and then I remember like reenacting like certain scenes with with friends like like during school, like during like the hallway or whatever. So there's certain stuff that kind of sticks with you just because it's funny. Of course, we wouldn't do like any of the extreme stuff, like what some of the cartoons do. You know,
I, f-
with
I feel left out every time like every time I miss like the episode that was shown that day and they're talking about it the next day. I feel left out. I'm like I can't relate because I haven't
Oh
seen
yeah.
the episode.
And your friends are just saying like random things, and you're like, what is everyone saying? Like you don't get it. And everyone will just say like one word and it seems benign, and then everyone starts laughing. You're like, why is that funny? And like anyone else who hasn't like witnessed that pop culture would just think like, these kids are crazy. What are they doing? They're just saying random things and laughing
Mhm.
about it. So I
Yeah,
want.
that's how I feel now.
Well, what about like the difference between the pop culture that was consumed like way back in the day versus now? Because like we talk about how everything is like we're pushing lots of colors, and then back
Mhm.
then not so much. I think of like one cartoon in particular from back then. There was music, there was like animals, and it was kind of violent too. And
Mhm.
you don't know what I'm
Oh,
talking
oh
about.
yeah, I know what you. Yeah. Like the main character's a rabbit.
And I kind of the main character's a rabbit. There you go, a road runner and a coyote. All right, you get what I'm talking about. But
Yeah.
those were violent. But I remember growing up, and even though they were very comedic, I knew that like I wasn't going to imitate that behavior because it was very extreme. It's like I don't have an anvil to go and drop onto somebody. And typically when you're a kid, you would throw an object. I mean, I think any kid's going to throw an object at some point. Then you found out real quick, like, oh, I shouldn't do that because I get in real big trouble if I do that.
I
But
think what I anticipate in shows like that though is like how they're going to kind of like mess with my mind in a way, like like okay, like for example, you've seen this in a lot of like cartoons, like one of the characters paints like a road on the wall and they're able to walk through it, and then one that's chasing them kind of just hits the wall. Like they're not able to do the same thing. Like that's kind of like what I liked about those old cartoons. Like you can't really predict what's gonna happen
it's like
because like
slapstick comedy.
yeah, yes, it's slapstick. Slapstick, and it's slapstick, and yes, like there's like a certain like unpredictability. Like even if you've seen, like with cartoons, you have this kind of like this one concept of what the show's about. Like they find ways to kind of like tease your brain. Okay, what's gonna happen? Because they don't really follow like what's like kind of logical, right, in the real world. They kind of have like cartoons kind of have their own like logic. Like you won't find anyone in real life who just pulls out like just whatever in their pocket, right?
Realism versus like surrealism. I
Mhm.
think that's what it is. Like the
Yeah.
stuff back then is kind of like you kind of knew it wasn't grounded in reality just because of how
Mhm.
it looked, or because it just, whereas now things feel more real because it's connected to a lot of different stuff. Like
Mhm.
I feel like some shows they even like imitate like brands, like certain brands or certain devices, like in actual shows where you're kind of like, oh, so you make that connection to you, like, oh, so that could be me, right? Or I feel like that's a good point, EJ. It's like that realism, like how far does it go
Mhm.
when you're actually watching it?
But those are some pretty high level adult concepts, right? Like surrealism,
Yeah.
something that an adult would understand. Like, okay, that's what I would expect to happen, but it doesn't. That's that surreal
Mhm.
aspect. You do see that somewhat in shows nowadays, so it can reach. I guess that's kind of universal that when they make cartoons, it's like adults and kids can enjoy it. Um, there are definitely kids shows though that have like no educational value whatsoever.
It's just fun.
Now,
It's just
if we're
fun.
thinking about like balance, is it good or bad to have like just entertainment, just pure entertainment for children?
No, I mean, I think entertainment is fine because, sometimes it just helps them escape from the real world. But I think if if while they're entertaining, they're trying to encourage the children to do those things, I think that's different. But
Okay,
if
can
it's
be
really
influenced.
just for entertainment purposes, I think it's fine.
Well, because there's a lot of that today where they're trying to influence kids while they're young to think a certain way.
Mhm.
And I remember seeing like on a streaming service, it's just like it's just like hints of getting kids to accept alternative lifestyles, you know, and things that, you know, I wouldn't teach my child to accept. It's like you're too
Mhm.
young to start, you know, encountering those concepts. And I cut off the streaming service. And I think that's important. It's like I think a lot of parents don't realize like you do have control over your child. You get to mold them exactly how you want. Don't allow society to do it because society won't take responsibility for your child when they get older, but you will.
Yeah.
You are going to feel that.
Yeah, I would say like just on what you were talking about earlier, right? You have like those shows that are just like just pure entertainment, and I feel like like growing up, my parents did give me kind of like a range of those things. There were shows that they had me and my brothers watching where it's just educational shows, right? They'll teach you counting, letters, sometimes even like writing. Like you can kind of follow along the show. Like those shows were just they were mostly educational, but of course like presented in a way that would grab kids' attention. Like colorful characters, songs, that kind of stuff. And then there were songs that were cartoons that were like edutainment, where it's kind of like in that middle ground of
I was just about to
they're
bring that
telling
up.
a story. Yeah, they're telling a
Edutainment.
story, but like in between like the story, there's like like there's this there's also this kind of like educational value to it, where they're trying to teach, oh, this is like I don't know if you guys watch that show with like it's like the one with like the blue dog. It leaves like clues. Yeah, he leaves like clues and stuff.
Yes.
That was like, I would say that's one more where it's like it's entertaining, but it's also educational, like in a way. And then you have shows that are just just like pure entertainment. I can't say that there's really like any educational value there for kids. I would say if you are like maybe like teens, or like, and kind of like more adult, like there's concepts to it where you'll look at it and then you'll kind of like see value to it. But it's kind of like it's still something that will just kind of fly past, like kids said, because they don't understand those concepts yet. But and I'm talking about like that one cartoon, Under the Sea. That one cartoon that's like under the sea. This one guy who lives in a fruit.
Oh,
If
the
you
one
watch
that
it,
they
Yeah.
yeah, the one
If
that's
you
a
watched it,
dishwashing implement.
Yeah.
That one. The yellow dishwashing implement. You brought up edutainment, and there was a really
Mhm.
good edutainment show on public broadcasting that involved an aardvark, and he had a friend rabbit, and it took place in the town, but it wasn't like straight up education, like, oh, here's how to count, here's how to
Mhm.
read. It was more of like the relationship of these children, right, and how to have proper relationships, with other children, how to deal with conflict and whatnot. And that was a really good show where it kind of balanced that side too, because it's not just like letters and numbers, like, oh, this is how you count. It was also the social aspect. Although later on, this show became controversial because it started to introduce controversial topics toward the end of its run. So that's another thing too, and that's something we got to be wary of. Like, what are these shows trying to promote? Because we don't necessarily hold the same values. That's just in general. Not everyone's going to hold the same values. You have to be aware of like what your children are watching.
Mhm.
Yeah, because some of the shows they have like subliminal messages it's not like out in your face, you know.
Yeah.
It's there's certain things and they've discovered this because people posted on social media of the different things that they see on the different cartoons, either what the characters are saying or what they're insinuating, and then they see the different actions of the children. And so it's really important that parents have to be aware of what their children are watching. And now we have the technology where they could actually block certain channels so that the children can't get into it. But that's the parents' responsibility. And yes, it is going to take more time, but it's better to do that now than have them watch things that they should not be watching.
Not just for children either, like for adults. Like if you're consuming content, you have strong principles, and it's trying to make you feel guilty about those principles that you hold. Well, maybe that's the wrong show for you. Maybe they're trying to, make you feel bad for
It makes
holding
me think of this what they were saying before, like say in an argument, you're kind of like which side you lean on, or you believe more. Kind of depends on whose side you hear first. Like you're more likely to believe the side that you heard first than to uh than to kind of like listen to kind of like both sides. I don't know. I've heard that like somewhere, and it kind of reminded me of like what you said about even for us, what we watch can also like influence like our mindset as well.
How about we transition now, since we kind of talked about it? Like bad behaviors. Okay. So off the top of my head, bratty characters. Okay. We all know that's that trope in TV shows. You have the really bratty character. He has funny things to say. And the thing is, and I know like my mom, she banned me from watching one of the shows because she was seeing that I was imitating that bratty behavior. So good on her that she did that. I always felt bad. I was like, man, why can't I watch this show? And it's like, no, she was right to not allow me to watch things like that. But oftentimes too, these characters throughout the show, they're really bratty, and they do a lot of bad things. But the majority of the show, like that's what you remember. That's where all the punchlines are at. By the end of the show, they do teach like a lesson, like, oh, okay, you were bad to think that way. You were bad to behave that way. But the thing that stands out to you the most are the jokes throughout the show. So what are your all's thoughts on like characters who are just straight up bad influences? Any examples?
Oh, man.
I
Uh,
know
Go
that
ahead.
there was
Go
a
ahead.
cartoon
Sorry, I guess
where there was a cartoon where the kid would call their parents by their first name. They didn't even call them mom or dad. They just called them like by first names. And I remember that was such a big deal while we were growing up. And they were telling us, don't be watching that because you should never call, parents by this. Because even in our schools, it was brought up that, you know, you guys should have respect for your parents and you don't call them whatever their first name is. You still call them mom and dad. And so I remember, I mean, yes, it was a funny cartoon and the different things that they did was funny, but the fact that they had like no respect for their parents, I thought that was, something that, yeah, little kids shouldn't be watching.
I would.
I feel like for
Go ahead.
mine,
Go ahead.
it's less about a behavior, but this is just something that I noticed even with my niece, where I feel like kids, when they do things, one of the first things that they do is they kind of gauge the reactions that they get from the things that they do. So if they see that this thing that they're copying from the show like gets a reaction, like, oh, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that again because it gets a reaction. And I've seen that like, as so that speaks to what you were talking about, Nate, where some of these behaviors that you see on the show, whether it's a funny character or it's like or like the class clown, right? And it's somebody, it's one thing to be like class clown and be funny more versus like the other line of it, like just being straight up disrespectful. And then you kind of see like, oh, other kids start commenting on it and they start like, like, oh, I can't believe you did that, and they start praising you, and then kids might see like, oh, is that accept? They start to think, oh, maybe that's acceptable because in the show, all these other people thought he was like a cool guy. So that's just something I've observed in like not just my niece, but in other children, that they pay attention to how other people react to them. So that kind of influences, when they're watching the show, like, oh, maybe so and so if I copy that, and it's not even like a full on like, I'm sure it's not a full logical thought, but it's just more like action response type thing.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I've had thoughts about like rock stars. I remember growing up, you kind of look up to rock rock stars and you're like, oh, they're real cool, their attitude.
Mhm.
And now that I'm like older and an adult with responsibilities, I was like, these guys are kind of jerks.
Irresponsible.
It's like they
Yeah,
have
like
very
that's not
irresponsible
real like a responsible way to live.
to themselves, to their bandmates, to their fans, like everything. And I'm like, well, why does anybody like emulate these at all? It's just not good. It's like maybe the music's good, but as a person, it's like no, they're terrible. And I feel like the youth don't hear that called out explicitly. That when people are doing bad behaviors, it's almost glorified. Along with how they say whatchamacallit, like bad news is good news, something along those lines. Like there's no such thing as like bad news or bad press.
Kind of going into kind of going into that, like how in TV, like kind of like prank shows in TV kind of became like popular, and I think because they were only showing like the good sides of that, where it's like, oh, like you'd think that all of the funny reactions that we got, on like those prank shows on TV is just like, oh, these are all the reactions that they got while they were like filming this. But in actuality of that, it's like, like sometimes like the prank doesn't really go well, especially if they end up pranking like the wrong person, right? And that's kind of like the part that people didn't see. And then you kind of have this like large kind of like there's sort of like a boom of like prank channels, like on especially on YouTube. Like I don't know, 2016, 2015, I think it was like when I started seeing a lot of those like prank channels, and they kind of keep one upping, trying to one up another, right? Trying to get like, oh, trying to do the most ridiculous prank, who can do the most outrageous prank that's going to get all the views, right? And you see people trying to imitate that and get themselves, sometimes they get themselves hurt, they get themselves in trouble with the law, like it's this sort of like this idea of like what they see kind of like on social media, on the internet. It's just the best sides of something, but it fails to account into like the other things that, like if you copy this thing, this can happen to you. They don't show that. They only show like the benefits. They don't show like the consequence, right?
A lot of those prank videos now that are viral, they're actually fake. You
Yeah.
can kind of tell when it's like the people who are involved in the prank are kind of unaware that there's someone like filming, like obviously filming the
Mhm.
prank. So I don't know when that became a thing. It's like, oh, we don't want to get in trouble because people have been calling the cops on pranksters. So now the pranks are just like fake. So they're not even real
Mhm.
anymore.
See,
But
but
see,
whether they're real or
oh,
not, I know that like with my nephew, when he sees stuff on there, he will try to do it.
yeah, that's the thing.
And he's
People will try to copy it, especially
it's just
kids.
a prank. Yeah, it's just a prank. It's
Mhm.
not real. But I'm like, yeah, but what you're doing is real, even though you're trying to prank people. And
Mhm.
like there, people used to do what was it called? It was like the door where they would ring the doorbell and just run and all
Oh,
that stuff, right?
ding
Arnie,
dong
did you
ditch.
ding dong ditch?
Yeah. And I'm like, don't be doing that. They're like, why? I go, first of all, you don't know what can happen. They can come after you or whatever. I go, don't do stuff like that. And I remember kids would be doing that at hotels because it's easy to run down the hall and knock on people's doors and then hide. But I'm like, yeah, that's not funny.
Maybe with like close friends, I would do something like that too.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't do
Mhm.
it to a
Yeah.
total stranger and
Stranger, yeah.
bother somebody. Yeah,
Plus,
there's
you don't know what they got. You don't know if they got dogs that they could release on you or, other stuff. So,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
in general, yeah, I do not recommend trying to prank just random people because you don't know. There might be something. They might be having a really really bad day.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want to do is catch someone on that.
Because
And
it's in the oh,
and with the
sorry.
pranks, you
Go
don't
ahead.
know. You don't know if the pranks, if something might go wrong with a prank. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so that's why I think,
Yeah, it's an adult. You can kind of put two and two together, right? That like just kind of making, especially those pranks where they kind of make fun of like random strangers with air quotes. It's like, like the, uh, it's an impressionable. I would say even like a teen, an impressionable teen, they would see that and they think, oh, this is the kind of reaction I'll get, if I do this to strangers. And like what Nate said earlier, sometimes they just pay like they just pay an actor to react to to the prank. And these kids sometimes they don't know that. They don't know that. They can't put two and two together that that's something you can do. Right. And then they'll just do it on like an actual stranger and get like a completely different like reaction, like, oh, this isn't how it went down, this isn't how it went down in the prank channel. Like they got angry, but then they they laughed when they saw the camera. It's like, no, no, it's like what you said. It can be fake. That kind of thing can be fake. But the thing is, like the kind of behavior that it is like teaching. It's teaching the behavior. It's not teaching like the consequence of that behavior.
But back in the days, I do remember pranking our friends, but back then it was like clean pranks. It wasn't anything that could like kill anybody or hurt anybody.
Yeah.
I remember we used to do camping and all that stuff, and whoever would fall asleep, we'd put like whipped cream or something in their hand, shaving cream or something, and then get a feather and feather their nose so that they get itchy, and then they'd go like that to themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So see, those are clean fun. And I think we got away with things like that because there was no social media to embarrass them after the fact. Because now you could do pranks right now, and as long as no one's seeing it, you guys could laugh at it. But the bad part is when people start filming it and then putting on social media for everyone else to see, then that's when they kind of get embarrassed. That's why I'm kind of glad we didn't have any of that stuff growing up, because we got to have all the fun we wanted without any social media repercussions.
One thing that though bothers me about like pop culture influences is how they portray the family, and especially how they portray dads. You think of almost every sitcom, TV show that has a family, the dad is always portrayed as incompetent, as lazy. And that's like almost universal. That is like the trope. You can look it up online. It is well known. And it does two things. Number one, it puts into society's minds that this is what dads are like, right? They're not hardworking. They're not competent. They're a bumbling buffoon. But on the other side, like some dads might think, oh, that's the type of person I might have to emulate. And I see that a lot in like sitcoms, and even though it's supposed to be a joke, right? You're just inundated with it in all pop culture. So it's unavoidable that this is going to stick in your mind.
Stick in your mind, or also like give yourself justification. Yes, like, well, that's the norm, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
it becomes like it like a standard. Like,
Like,
excuse
oh,
me,
so it's not just me then, like, it's not just me then. I guess that's like just something we do. like you get home, that's just like, it's just something we do. Like, yeah, it's like Tony said, it's like some take it as like a justification to kind of act that way, because it's like, oh, like this is kind of like my demographic. Like this is my demographic. This is like kind of like how media kind of normalizes it. So now you're like, oh, this is just what I do. Because as a dad, that's just normal.
Yeah, it becomes a stereotype that people start to manifest in real life, whether intentional or not. So it's
I
something
would
definitely
say,
we need to be aware of, like ourselves.
I would say, Nate, on that, like there was a time where I thought to myself, am I supposed to like be really good at I was like reading all the math books and stuff. Am I supposed to like really know all this stuff? Because I didn't. I couldn't figure it out. Like numbers were my my least favorite like subject in school, but I was like, okay, I have to know this.
I did get my degree in math, but I can't add numbers in my head. That's people make fun of me about that all the time.
I know.
You get a math degree and you can't add these 2-3 digit numbers in your head. I'm like, nope, not at all.
I do that, but I still have to use a calculator to check if I'm correct. Because I'm like, I can't trust myself to be correct on these things. So I still need to consult like a calculator to be like, okay, that's how it like that's the sum like on my like when I'm doing like mental calculations. Okay, I gotta check. I gotta check first though before I before I confirm. But yes.
Now, what about like questionable source material? Okay, so we're not promote when they're not promoting good values. Okay, we could think about uh probably the most popular children's entertainment company. Okay, there's all sorts of theories like they're trying to push uh like popularizing disorders. Arnie, you had brought this up in our pre-production. Can you
Yes.
explain that?
Well, so they were showing that there are some cartoons where the main characters, they symbolize the different things that people go through. Like one of the characters they said had the Stockholm syndrome, right, where they fell in love with their kidnappers, and the other ones, the one of them was ADHD. Other ones where so there's like different things that people like experience and all that stuff, and they're portraying it in the characters, but not in a way that's noticeable, and you don't think about it until after the fact that someone brought it up to you.
Also, a little glorifying it to some degree,
Yes,
almost to
yes,
where a child would be like, if I experience this, I should be excited and be
yeah.
happy
So
that
like
this
if somebody kidnaps me, you know granted they're blue-eyed blonde hair, then I should fall in love with them. Right? but that's that's what it is. Or the other ones where where it shows that they can't be independent, where they have to rely on someone to save them, you know that those are the things. And I'm going to admit to you, okay, when I was a child and I was watching all these little fairy tales, I thought that's what real life was, that one day, you'll meet your Prince Charming and hop on a horse and sail off into the sunset, right? Because that's what those were the cartoons we were watching. And it's not until later in life where you realize, well, first of all, they don't really have royalty in the US. It's just in Europe. So if you want to meet a prince, you better go to Europe, right? Because you're not going to meet him here in the US. And then, second of all, you just start to realize, well, with these animals talking to you and singing, yeah, that's not going to happen in real life.
you think that causes like a distorted view of relationships?
I think it does. I think it does. Because for me, that was my whole thing. Oh, I'm waiting for Prince Charming to come along, and then Prince Charming came along, like, oh no, Prince Eric is cuter, but still, it's something it's something that people aspire for, that probably will not be something that they can attain. But yeah.
I don't know what it is, but like I know when I hit my 20s, like I could I could separate between like, what was fantasy and what was real. It's like sure, in a rom-com, it's like okay, that's a nice fun story and it's pretty cool how everything turned out. They always end up together, right?
I
But
would
then
say man, on
I'm still grounded in real life knowing that like well, if you really want to, get the person that you fall in love with, it's like you got to do A, B, C, and D. You got to, take care of school, take care of your jobs. Go ahead, EJ.
yeah.
What were you gonna say?
No, I would say kind of like on that as well, and what Arnie says, like it sets this sort of like expectation. I would say even for me, like I would say in my teen years growing up, I was like I kind of like lost hope. I was like I was that I was ever gonna be in a relationship, because like with how media portrays like how they portrays like the hot guy like in every show, it's just, oh, I don't look like that, I don't act like that, I guess I'm just gonna be alone.
See, but I always
Because
see
no
like
one is gonna like the way I look, the way I act, because I don't look like that at all.
but I would always see like ordinary looking guys and think like, well, if he could get married, I can get married too. And I
Well,
also put it into perspective like millions and billions of people throughout the ages have gotten married. So it's not necessarily an uncommon thing.
Mm.
Just
Because even with some of the sitcoms you watched as a teenager, you know, they had all the good looking guys, they were the jocks, they were the ones that everybody liked, and then like the smart kids, the nerdy looking ones, they looked weird, they weren't like good
Yeah.
looking at all.
Yeah. And they're kind of sometimes they're almost always like kind of like the butt of the joke, right? You know,
what's
like
that?
they're kind of like the butt of the joke every
Oh
time.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
the
yeah.
nerdy characters, it's like they get like made fun of, and it's okay because yeah, because
But that's
they're
the thing. They were
they're
definitely trying to put everyone in a particular category for a show.
mhm,
But like people on the football team would be like mathletes, be really smart, or know how to play music, or be nerdy and be into nerdy things. So it's like there is definitely a disconnect between how they want to portray these different types of people in school, because it's like nobody in school is actually a complete 100% stereotypical trope. So it's kind of
mhm.
like a false reality.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing with like those shows as well. It's like it's like from it set like an expectation where I thought to myself like I you know like I'm kind of like in the same age group as the characters they're portraying, but I'm very far from like reaching where they're at. So it did make me feel like kind of like inadequate, like in a way where I was like yeah, I guess I guess there's something wrong with me because I'm not like they're also like this is kind of like because I was looking at them like they were the norm like this is this is the norm everywhere like I was looking at it like that. It's like, oh, I'm at the age where like at the age level of like the characters they're portraying, but I'm not nearly as competent as they
When
like
there's like a
that's the
catch
kind of way.
22 to that, because the shows that portray stereotypical tropes, right? They're popular,
Mhm.
they're entertaining. There's no doubt about it. There's like a
Mhm.
small handful of shows, TV shows, that try to portray like, people actually accurately, and usually they fail
Mhm.
within the first season. It just doesn't really catch. So there's kind of that catch 22 where it's like, okay, you want to avoid, being surrounded by media that is unrealistic in its portrayal in its portrayal of reality. But then if
Mhm.
it's not portraying reality in some fantastical way, you're not going to want to watch it.
See, and you know what? It's true though, because you look at any show, whether it's a hospital show, whether it's a cop show, no matter what kind of show it is, I guarantee you put hot guys on there, people will be watching. If you put average looking people, they won't. Like there's that one hospital show that's based in Seattle, supposedly, right? Everybody was watching them because of all the good looking doctors, but I guarantee you, if
I
you put
wasn't.
like normal, regular looking doctors, nobody would have watched them. And so now you expect, hey, if I go to the hospital, I better have a cute doctor, right? And then your doctor walks in and he's just normal looking.
That's where you got to ground yourself though in reality. You need to throw in a few documentaries into your consumption, or some indie films that don't use the A-lister actors. That way you have a more well balanced view of the world.
Okay, but I do have to admit, because one time I got a new doctor because I had moved and I needed a new doctor. And I'm here just like playing on my phone and stuff. And as soon as he walks in, I'm like, oh my goodness. And then he goes, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I was just I go, and then I had to play it off because, like I said, he was really good looking, but I had to play it off and say, are you old enough to be a doctor? Because he did look young, but I couldn't get off the phone like, oh, blue eye blonde hair, good looking. I'm like, I've never seen a doctor that good looking. But the downside to that, I must say also, is because he was so hot. Even if I was sick, I couldn't tell him what was wrong because then I'd get embarrassed, right? So I'm like, no, I need to go see a normal doctor where I can tell him my issues. But yeah.
Moral of the story: touch some grass. just, just, just base your knowledge of like TV shows, actually experience the stuff outside.
All right, let's go ahead and transition now into targeted media towards children. All right. Our favorite cereals growing up. They were loaded with sugar and they always featured a cartoon character. There's no denying it. They're trying to get our children to buy these things, to tell their parents to buy these things. Because I told my mom, buy this cereal, because of a particular cartoon character appealed to me in a commercial, you know. Is that unethical to be able to, target junk food towards children?
It's called marketing.
Yeah, I can't.
Yeah, but is it
it's kind of
ethical?
like on a gray, kind of like it's kind of like on a gray area. I think, like I feel like it's on a kind of like a gray area where, like, yes, like why, like, because you think of it this way, like, why do TV stations feature cartoons? Because it's entertaining to children, right? I think of it like in that same way, like if they're trying to market like they're trying to market like a really sweet like breakfast cereal to kids, of course they're gonna use a cartoon. Because imagine if you didn't put like cartoons, kids wouldn't kind of really pay attention to that. They might pay
Right.
attention to it if they already know what it tastes like.
But they
But,
talk about
you know-
introducing legislation to like ban like at least commercials during children's
Mm.
programming that promote, junk food.
I would
basically.
say I didn't watch
See,
a
but
lot of
you know
like.
what? Here's the thing. Okay, I'm not saying it's ethical. I'm not saying it's unethical. Okay, companies are going to do what they do because they need to sell the product because they need to make money. That's what a business is. So I totally get that. But that's where parents have to come in. Where yes, if they're going to show these commercials, the parents have to step up and say, well, no, that's not really good for you, and tell them why. I mean, I used to do it to my nephews all the time when they would see things on TV and they're like, oh, I want that. And I'm like, no, that's not good for you. I
Right,
go,
but
"They're
that's
just
the
making-"
thing. They're holding that children's programming hostage effectively with junk food. Like, is that right? I mean, I'll just say it right now. That is unethical to market corn syrup to little children through a cartoon.
I don't know.
Mm.
I enjoyed
Kinda
myself
get-
when I was a kid.
No, I kind of get that though. Like the kind of like they had to be. I feel like for like
And-
TV stations,
and
they
even
kind of
if
have to
they
be
wanted-
aware of what they show, like during the time slot that it's like this time slot it's for like kids shows. Most of our audience are gonna be kids. Like you gotta be mindful of like the kind of like commercials that they show during those time slots.
But
Right.
here's the thing: even if they show those commercials, right, and the kid's gonna say, "I want it, I want it, I want it," the parents are the one buying it, so it's up to the parents. If the parents say no, then it's a no. If the parents say okay and give in and buy it, then that's the parents' responsibility because they hold the money. It's not like the kids have the credit card or anything like that where they could just go run to the store and buy themselves.
Right.
And
But,
so
I mean, they'll still go to school. They'll still go to friends. They're still going to bug their parents.
yeah.
I'm just saying there's definitely lines when it comes to children because there's absolutely things that you would absolutely say do not market towards children. Okay.
Mm.
Yes,
Million
there's
things
stuff
come
that
to
they really
mind.
shouldn't.
So
you know?
why doesn't sugary junk food fall also in that category? Because it is also just as destructive to them.
Because it's delicious.
Mhm. Yeah.
If we
See,
never
if you're an adult, you won't. If you're an adult and you see like the nutritional value of that breakfast, you're like, that's that amount of sugar is like the amount I would eat in a whole day, and
Right. Exactly.
you won't buy it. You won't buy it as an adult. So who
And-
do they market it to then? The
but the
kids.
thing is, like with us, we weren't allowed to have cereal because like that, it is sugary. And so my parents didn't let us have it. But on the weekends, then they would let us have a bowl of cereal. And with 6 kids, it's easy to finish a box really easily because there's 6 kids, right? So, but at
Mhm.
least we were still able to have it. They didn't totally deprive us of it, but we didn't have it every single day. And I think with moderation, I don't think there's a problem with it.
I guess that's where my
You
perspective-
cannot say no sugar whatsoever. You gotta have sugar.
I think
just
that's
what makes
where
you-
my perspective comes from because I'd like whatever access I wanted to cereal. It was just there, eat as much as you want. And my parents didn't necessarily know that much about nutrition. I know now, like I don't feed my son cereal at all. I'll just say that. Never,
Yeah.
never given him
I'd say
cereal.
even as a kid, like for me, cereals were a snack, not really breakfast. Like we would have them occasionally, but not all the time. You know, like rice was always the breakfast, which I absolutely like. You know, like I no complaints.
See, but now you can't say like, oh, rice because rice is more healthy. Technically, for a diabetic, no, it's not.
Yeah.
See, so it's the same thing as having cereal. Do you know what I'm saying? It's about the moderation,
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
know.
I'll take the rice and coat it with sugar.
Hey, we used to
Cereal
do
is-
that. I'm not kidding. That was our breakfast when we didn't have cereal, right? Because you
Yeah.
know, mom and dad said you can't have cereal. So grandma did the alternative. She'd give us rice, put sugar in it, and milk, and it was delicious.
There is a thing though between like sugar and corn syrup. They're debating that. Like they behave differently in the body. Because yeah, I think we threw sugar on everything and we were fine. And they started noticing when corn syrup started appearing and everything, the kids started getting bigger. So there's
Mhm.
that.
Yes.
What about you, Tony? You've been awfully neutral.
No, not neutral, just kind of listening, just because there's a lot I feel like that we've discussed today that I don't think I even realized has these little impacts on us, whether it comes to like food, like who's marketing my food and all these different things. But I like Arnie's like endpoint, not just, for the parents, but even as we get older. I feel like the world has evolved into such a different animal now. Like just with that idea earlier of like blended reality, the way that I think of how people can play games, right? And you know what I'm talking about, right? Where you're catching things like in the world in the world, you know what I'm talking about? Does anyone know what I'm talking about? It's like a virtual virtual game you're catching. Anyway,
What are you catching?
it's I can't say the thing because
Oh,
then you're gonna know what I'm talking about.
I
But
feel
you're
like
basically
I'm like 50%.
no, it's okay. But the point is, there's a lot of things out there that kind of mesh what's reality with what's supposed to be fantasy, what's supposed to be. So I think being able to not only on the parents, but even as older friends, as older siblings, as older cousins, being able to kind of help the younger ones be able to distinguish that because it might not necessarily be on the parents all the time because like what you said earlier, Nate, the parents are not always around them. So if we can do our part is like older examples to kind of let them know because they're growing up in this world not having that opportunity to completely separate the two just because it's so in their face, like with the gadgets and everything, with stuff that pops up on YouTube, on wherever they get access to. It's just so much more easily there. So I feel like for me, my takeaway from this broadcast is like, what are things that I can do to kind of help the younger generation be more aware of those things, to be more, um, I don't want to like be like never sugar ever, or, like, never entertainment, never, but just kind of teach them to be more thoughtful or more mindful about the stuff that they're like taking in, whether it's visual stuff, whether it's what you're eating, just trying to have those conversations with them as well. Not in like a way where I'm like a parent, because I'm not a parent. I'm just a I'm still like a kid myself. But just doing my part in that way. I feel like that's my takeaway from this broadcast is being able to do my part in, you know, gentle reminders of what we can do to be better at recognizing where the lines are at, you know.
Yeah, and it's very difficult trying to teach anyone nuance, right? Nuance is a big thing. Like knowing how important something is, how real something is, how fake something is, whether you can just step back and be like, that's just entertainment. I don't have to imitate that. It's not real life. Not everyone can separate those two things. And I think that is important. And something I've never really thought about deeply, like in how to teach my child about nuance. But as he gets older, you know, children kind of figure that out through context. It's like, okay, there's rules, but then sometimes things, don't necessarily follow the rules. So how do you judge things from there? Right. And I feel like if you have solid principles, that's what you fall back on, even though there's nuances that come around. Any final thoughts, Arnie?
Yes, it's okay to have sugar, just not too much.
It
Because the more you
depends.
say no sugar, the more they're going to want it. So give them a little.
If sugar is destroying your body, like me, then you should probably avoid sugar altogether. Any final thoughts, EJ?
I was just saying, like for parents, like what's kind of been said already, like just parents be aware of like what your kids eat, what your kids watch, and what your kids are exposed to. Just be aware of those things, So, like for the parents, because for me, that's what my parents were to me. They were aware of like what I was watching. They were aware of what I was eating. Yeah, but yeah.
All right. I thank my co-panelists for joining me in today's conversation and for sharing your thoughts. Okay. I think we learned a lot today. And in the end, I think we all came to the same conclusion that there's nuance in almost everything to, not be so simple-minded when we have to face different things. So to all of our listeners and viewers, we thank you for tuning in. We hope this has been a conversation that mattered to you. Please take the time to comment, like this, subscribe, etc. And let us know if there's any conversations that you would like to hear that matter to you. Till next time, thank you for joining us here on INCRadio Chatline.
Let me always dwell in